Noah Barkin, who heads up the small yet mighty Berlin outpost of the Rhodium Group, here to talk implications of Russia's invasion in Ukraine for Germany and the rest of the EU. Welcome to China Talk.
Good to be here, Jordan.
By the way, the Rhodium application for summer interns is open and interviews have already begun. If you're interested in working with us, please apply as soon as possible at rhg.com/careers. Noah, how did Germany's defense and foreign policy consensus emerge post-unification?
A good question, Jordan. Well, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, German reunification, I think there was a feeling in Germany that the world was sort of bending towards liberal democracy, that Germany, which had been sort of on the wrong side of multiple wars in the 20th century, that the world was now moving in its direction, and this was a world that was more peaceful. There were no immediate threats. The Soviet Union was being dismantled, and so Germany started reducing its defense spending quite significantly. It got rid of, this was in 2011, so quite a bit later, got rid of the obligation for young Germans to do military service. And on the foreign policy front, it was a foreign policy that was really driven by economic interests, I think, for the most part. Germany was relying on the U.S. for its security. It wasn't shelling out the billions that it had for its military during the Cold War. And it was, it was trading with everyone. It was turning into a sort of manufacturing powerhouse, and doing exporting. It became, one of the world's leading exporters, and doing business with the U.S., but also with countries like China, which I guess especially in the 2000s was emerging as a big economy, and an economy that was quite compatible with that of Germany's. Germany, which made machine tools, engineering goods, etc. These were the goods that China really needed. So with China, with Russia, as we're seeing now, especially on the energy front, Germany was really doing business with everyone around the world. The term that became popular in this period was Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. So the idea that if you trade with China, if you trade with Russia, that this is going to push them politically to become more open. And I think this was really an excuse that was used by the German political establishment, the business establishment, to sort of make them feel better about doing business with authoritarian countries.
And let's be clear, it was that was a trendy a trendy line of thinking worldwide, right? You had plenty of American presidents who bought into the same thesis.
Sure, it wasn't just Germany. So I think this world in which Germany could trade with everyone, invest everywhere, accept investment from countries like China, get its gas from Russia, rely on the U.S. for its security, that began to sort of crumble. Certainly 5 years ago, but probably a bit longer if you look at it closely. I think over the final years of the Merkel government, she was in power from 2005 to 2021, so 16 years. She was still, I think, clinging on to this old world of globalization, where German prosperity was linked to sort of unfettered trade and investment with everyone. And of course, there was, Donald Trump stirred a great deal of concern in Germany. There were fears about the U.S. commitment to Europe, to NATO, etc. So Germany, a debate did start in Europe about strategic autonomy and independence and sovereignty, and relying more on themselves, but not a lot changed in practice. This was a debate which evolved, but in practice, Merkel did not really tell average Germans that things really needed to change. And although she did start investing in the military more, this was a very gradual process.
Great. So what happened after Merkel left, and what was the sort of consensus idea of the next 5 years of what Germany was going to be doing, late January 2022?
Yeah, well, if you look back at the election campaign, there were three main candidates: Olaf Scholz, who's now Chancellor, Armin Laschet, who was the leader of Merkel's Conservative Party, and the Greens, who were led by Annalena Baerbock, who is now the foreign minister. If you look back at the debates in the run-up to the election, Baerbock is the only one who's really saying that things need to change in terms of German foreign policy, that she really painted it as this narrative of democracies versus authoritarian countries, which I think, is an idea which is quite popular in the United States these days. But her two opponents, Olaf Scholz and Armin Laschet, were both preaching continuity and sort of dismissing Baerbock as naive, because she was suggesting that, well, you can't continue to bolster economic ties with China, that this Germany has dependencies that it's created. This creates certain national security vulnerabilities, and you need to rethink this. And I think the answer from both Scholz and Laschet was, it's dangerous to question a foreign policy which is based on values, which tries to manage these relationships based on sort of human rights and issues like that. So their message was, we need to continue to trade and invest in China. We need to maintain a good relationship with Russia. Yes, Putin is a problem, but we don't need to really rock the boat.
All right. So fast forward a few weeks from that point in the narrative. Take it away, Noah.
Yeah. Well, now, I think, Olaf Scholz took power in early December. So he's only been chancellor for about 3 months. He's in a coalition with two other parties, the Greens. As I said, Baerbock is now the foreign minister, and the other party is the Free Democrats. Scholz himself is a member of the Social Democrats, the center-left party here in Germany, which has a sort of a reputation of being quite close to Russia. The SPD chancellor in the 1970s, Willy Brandt, is known for his outreach to the East, Ostpolitik, and I think the SPD has always clung to this. Of course, this was during the Cold War, when Germany was divided between East and West. But Scholz came in not promising a big shakeup in German foreign policy, but the events, of course, have gotten in the way of his plans, and we saw, fairly early on, I think even before he came into office, Russia was massing troops on the border with Ukraine. I think the instinct of Scholz was not to play this up too much, to reach out, to try to talk to Putin. I don't think anyone here believed that a full-blown invasion was a possibility. But when that happened, when Putin recognized these two separatist areas in Luhansk and Donetsk, and then shortly thereafter began sending Russian troops into Ukraine, that changed the dynamic. And there was a big debate about would Germany shut off Nord Stream 2, or Nord Stream 2 is this pipeline that Germany that Russia built that sort of bypasses Eastern European countries like Ukraine, goes through the Baltic Sea and straight to Germany. And this was pushed by Scholz's party, the Social Democrats. There was a Nord Stream 1 pipeline that was built under the former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who's known to have very close ties to Putin. He's now a lobbyist for Russian gas companies. And another pipeline was built in the final years of the Merkel government, Nord Stream 2. And so one of the big questions was, and this pipeline has essentially been built, but gas has never flowed through it. Would Germany use this pipeline as leverage with Russia? In other words, threaten never to turn this pipeline on if there was any sort of military aggression by Russia in Ukraine. And initially, Scholz and senior members of his party, they hesitated and were reluctant to use Nord Stream 2 as leverage, came under huge pressure. In the end, Scholz went to visit Biden in Washington, and Biden at the news conference said, if Russia invades, then Nord Stream 2 is dead. Scholz himself didn't even utter the words Nord Stream 2 during the press conference, despite being pressed several times. So I think we saw quite a bit of foot dragging, a reluctance to kind of see this Russian buildup as a major game-changing event by Scholz and his government initially. But of course, once Russian troops invaded, and we saw pictures of civilians being killed and Russian troops rolling towards Kyiv, that changed the dynamic. I think over the course of a weekend, on a Saturday, I think Scholz and his entourage, they were under huge pressure because they'd been foot dragging on how to react to this, and they decided to get ahead of this issue. Scholz stood up in the Bundestag, the lower house of the German parliament, on a Sunday, and announced basically three things. One, that Germany was going to deliver weapons to Ukraine, which it had always resisted before. Two, that it was going to wean itself of its reliance on Russian gas. And three, and this, I think, was perhaps the biggest surprise of all, was that he was going to create a special fund to invest 100 billion euros in the German military. So it was an acknowledgement that the German military had been underfunded for years, that we were in a new world. There was a war in Europe. This is Ukraine. There's only one country between Ukraine and Germany, and that's Poland. And that Germany had to rethink its approach. That the world had become much more dangerous, and Germany had to invest in its military. And this is something that Germany, although military budgets had gone up during the final years of Angela Merkel, they had resisted pressure from the U.S. and other allies to invest what NATO agreed back in 2014, which was that every member would invest 2% of its GDP in its military by 2024. So Germany had been moving in that direction, but very slowly. Scholz was suddenly saying, we're going to do it in one fell swoop. And we're going to reach this, we're going to reach this 2% target within a year or two. And we're going to do it by investing massive amounts of money in the German military. So this was a real surprise to everyone. And now we're at the implementation phase. He has to sell this domestically.
Noah, it seems to me the way you lay out the narrative that this was overdetermined, and that there was no sort of other, had another candidate been elected, had a kind of, slightly different political consensus been apparent, like regardless of like a reasonable makeup of the German system in 2022, you would still have had this dramatic a response. Is that the case? Do you think there's a bit of Olaf kind of like overcompensating because he was like wrong on the issue circa January 2022, or was the sort of domestic political consensus so strong that these radical measures needed to be taken that there was no way in which you wouldn't have seen this level of a German response to the events?
Well, it's a good question, Jordan. I don't think we'll ever know. I mean, I think certainly that Scholz and his team felt they were felt under huge pressure, that they were sort of behind on this issue, that they were getting a huge amount of criticism. Germany was criticized by for not sending weapons to Ukraine. Criticized, the ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador here in Berlin was very vocal. We had leaders from other European countries coming through Berlin and making very clear. The Polish prime minister came through town, sent a tweet right before he was going to meet with Scholz, and said he was going to try to shake him into to having a sort of a conscience regarding what was happening in Ukraine. So they were under huge criticism. I think they clearly felt that something needed to be done, something that was bold to get back on the right foot. I think it's hard to say whether another chancellor would have done the same, but I think what's very clear is that the story that German leaders were telling the population was no longer credible. That you can, continue to do deals with, and let's not forget, Putin annexed Crimea in 2014. There was a brief invasion of Georgia in 2008. He was active in Syria, working with the Assad regime. And despite all this, the German government was agreeing to build pipelines that were bypassing some of these Eastern European countries like Ukraine. So this story that we can do deals with everyone, that we don't have to invest heavily in our military, in our own defense, that story was no longer credible. So I think whether it was Scholz or another chancellor, I think that we were moving in this direction, and these changes were overdue.
In the nearly 5 years I've been doing this show, recording remotely has always been a bit of a nightmare. Halfway through a great conversation, a connection would die, servers would time out, the audio quality would go busted. The better a conversation went, the more stressed out I got that I would end up losing the audio. I tried at least 5 different software solutions, including Zencaster, Zoom, Ringer, and Squadcast, but all of them lacked the functionality and reliability of what I finally landed on, Riverside. Riverside has a great feature suite from local and cloud-based recording so that even if my guest internet is garbage, I still have decent sound to share with you all, to 4K video, which I'm going to start using to spruce up the ChinaTalk YouTube channel. But most important, it just works. Before Riverside, 10% of my recordings broke, but in the past 2 years I've been rolling with Riverside, it has been absolutely rock solid. If you're a podcaster or YouTuber, or just someone who runs online events, check the platform out at riverside.fm. It wasn't just a top-down thing, right? We had hundreds of thousands of people in the street one weekend in Berlin, and it seems to be a real kind of like collective outrage at what's been happening in Ukraine. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of neuralgia points which this is pressing on among the German people more broadly?
Well, I mean, war has a special resonance in Germany. There are walking around in Berlin, you can still feel the war. There's a massive memorial to the Holocaust right next to the Brandenburg Gate. There are buildings here in Berlin that still have, bullet holes and mortar holes in them from World War II. It's part of the collective memory in Germany, and I think in order for Germany and German politicians to sort of change their outlook, their foreign and security policy approach, I think you needed some sort of major crisis, and we now have a war in Europe. People are watching this on their televisions, and it's really resonating. We had over 100,000 people in Tiergarten, which is the sort of central park, which runs up to the Brandenburg Gate. A few weeks ago, this was the same day that Scholz went before the Bundestag and made his big speech. You had a rally yesterday for Women's Day in front of the Russian embassy, thousands of people, and so this is also a ground up thing. And if you look at the opinion polls, Germans were always opposed to a solid majority in Germany was always opposed to military interventions, to investing in the military, to certainly delivering weapons to conflict zones, and that has flipped. There's now 65% of Germans are in favor of these measures. So we've seen a shift in public sentiment, and I think Scholz and his people probably realized that this was happening. And that's the reason why they did what they did. Yeah.
Noah, you had a quote from an anonymous senior German former official saying, "Freedom does not mean as much in Germany as it might in other places." Did it actually always mean a lot, and people were just not worried about losing it?
Well, yeah. This person who's a member of the government, but I was talking to him on a sort of off the record basis. He was in the previous government, also in the current one. His view was, he pointed to the fact that after World War II, neither East nor West Germany was truly sovereign. That East Germany was controlled. Certainly, the Soviet Union had a hand on what was happening in East Germany. And West Germany was divided into zones that the Allies didn't control, but certainly in the decades after World War II, it was not perhaps fully sovereign, according to this person. And so his argument was that Germans are used to living without the degree of freedom that perhaps you see in some other countries, and that and they also went through traumatic economic times, the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, which gave rise to the Nazis. So I think stability is very important in Germany, and with stability, closely linked to stability is economic prosperity. And Germany has had a very good run over the last 15, 20 years, partly because it was a trading nation. Globalization was flourishing, and it was delivering the goods that other countries needed. It's hard to say. I think every country has its own relationship with the idea of freedom. The U.S. maybe is a bit of a an outlier. I don't know, but certainly in Germany, it's not the same attitude that I think we see in the U.S.
Noah, to close, what is this going to mean for German-China relations?
Well, I think that's a big question. I think Germany is questioning its reliance on Russian gas, and that is part of a bigger question about its dependence on authoritarian states, because it has a very close economic relationship with China. Some of Germany's biggest companies, certainly the car makers and a few others, are hugely dependent on the Chinese market. They get, 40% of their revenues and profits from China. So I think the big question that people are asking now is what the changes in German policy that we're seeing with regard to Russia. So Germany's saying we're going to wean ourselves of Russian gas because this makes us vulnerable. Is that going to spread to or turn into a broader debate about Germany's dependence on a country like China? And I think that debate was already percolating before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think it certainly is sort of wind in the sails of those people who are saying that, the world is moving in a direction, who embrace this narrative of democracies versus authoritarians, states. So we'll have to see. I think a lot depends on how China behaves in this crisis. We've seen China offering its support for Russia, hasn't condemned this Russian aggression. Now I think Europe is putting huge pressure on China to use its influence with Putin, if it has influence, and stop the violence. There was a call between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron with Xi Jinping in recent days, and I think that's the message to China. You need to use your influence to stop this death and destruction that we're seeing in Ukraine. And I think if China is constructive about this, that can mitigate the damage to its reputation. But if China sits on the sidelines and continues to sort of talk out of both sides of its mouth on what's happening in Ukraine, then I think that could seriously damage do lasting damage to its image in Europe, which is not great to begin with. That's perhaps a topic for another podcast. But this certainly has the potential to damage German, China, and also European-China relations.
Noah Barkin, thank you for part.
Thanks, Jordan.
Platz für Sieger, Kriegsminister gibt's nicht mehr und auch keine Düsenflieger. Heute zieh ich meine Runden, seh die Welt in Trümmern liegen, hab 'n Luftballon gefunden, denk an dich und lass ihn fliegen.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
I am excited to announce the Adweek Podcast Network, the first ever podcast network created for brand enthusiasts and anyone curious about the latest trends in marketing, advertising, technology, and culture. Adweek has partnered with leading industry voices to bring you analysis of trends, pressing challenges, and to share top-tier insights to help you level up your career, creativity, and strategy. Starting April 12th, you will get to hear brand new shows like Young Influentials, The Speed of Culture, Adweek Presents, and some of your favorites like Yeah, That's Probably an Ad, CMO Moves, and Season 2 of Metaverse Marketing. We are also happy to be the new home for amazing shows like Brave Commerce, The Great Fail, and To Dine For with Kate Sullivan. Learn more by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. That's adweek.com/podcasts. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast
recommends.